Hey guys, welcome to what might be Defension's very first video on YouTube. Some of you might know we have been wanting to create a presence on this platform for quite a while. We would like to be able to produce some good content for you, and this is just a test. So it's a rough and ready test. It's going to be rough and ready content-wise, presentation-wise, and the editing as well. But if it has got good feedback and if it sits well on the platform, we might start slowly but surely, we might start creating a backlog of videos that we'll be posting, hopefully, regularly. Today's theme, it's going to be an easy and a short one, hopefully. So today's theme is going to be about bad ideas for weapons. We're going to review quickly 3 weapons that were developed at some point and proved to be pretty bad ideas. So without further ado, let's start. So the first weapon in our series is the Paris gun, or Kaiser Wilhelm gun as the German called it. So that supergun, built by Krupp, was deployed by the Germans outside of Paris in early 1918, and it was as magnificent as it was useless. So it's very impressive, really. It weighed 256 tons. It had a range of 120 kilometers. The barrel length was 21 meters. It was an absolute monster. And yet, it didn't really achieve anything apart from putting pressure on the German war industry, which was already dying by then. I mean, we're at the end of the war. The Germans are suffering shortages of all sorts, and then they come around and produce that type of weapon. So let's go through the technical aspect of it. So the first aspect really is accuracy, and accuracy was very relative, really. 120 kilometer was a lot. It was a long distance in 1918. So the German fired between 320 and 370 shells with that gun, and about 300 hit Paris. So that's how inaccurate that gun was. You can't call Paris a small city, and yet about 50 to 70 shells just, well, they landed somewhere, but not on the city itself. So that was the first issue. The gun was not accurate at all. The other issue was all the pressures involved in when firing the gun. So they were enormous, and they were putting a lot of wear and tear through the gun barrel, and every shell was at risk of a premature detonation. So to avoid that, the walls of the shells were also very, very thick. So you had, each shell weighed about 21 kilo, but there was only 7 kilos of explosive in each of them. So you have a big, a big shell. It's a big caliber, but barely any explosive power in it. So when it landed, it didn't really do much damage whatsoever. Okay, so talking about pressures involved in firing those big shells. The gun barrel had a lifespan of 65 shells, and every one of those shells was different. To tell you how bad the wear and tear on the barrel was, it is estimated that every time you fired a shell through the barrel, you were shaving off from the lining just under half a kilo of metal. So the barrel started life as a 211 millimeter barrel, that's the caliber, and every time a shell was fired, the caliber was expanding. It means that Krupp was supplying the gun with 65 shells that had to be fired in a sequence, because every shell was slightly, incrementally wider than the previous one. So you were firing your 65 shells in sequence. That's about 3 to 4 days maximum. The gun rate of fire never exceeded 20 a day. And once those 65 shells were fired, you had to send the barrel back to Germany. They were then reboring it as a 238 millimeter barrel, and let's send you another batch of 65 shells, again marked, had to be fired in a sequence, and each shell was incrementally bigger than the previous one. So yeah, that was about it. Once you had fired the two 65 shell batches, the barrel was considered spent and had to be melted down, I suppose, sent back to Germany and melted down. So very expensive to produce, very expensive to operate, very slow rate of fire, great range but extremely poor accuracy, and very, very low damage. It was meant to be a psychological weapon. It was meant to terrorize the population in Paris. And well, the first few days they were wondering what was landing on their head. They thought maybe, they were being bombed by Zeppelins. When they identified that those were in fact not bombs but shells, and how little damage they were doing, they kind of went back to drinking their coffee and eating their croissant, and that was about it. So was it a good weapon? No. Was it worth it? Probably not. Well, at the end of the war, the Treaty of Versailles forbade the Germans from developing super cannons again. In fact, they were meant to hand over the Kaiser Wilhelm gun to the Allies. They've never done it. Not only did the Allies never find the gun, apparently the blueprints were also destroyed, so that is lost to history. Not that Krupp gave up really on its supergun, because they came back with very long-range guns again in the Second World War. But in the meantime, early post-war period, the German scientists were forbidden from developing artillery, in a sense. So instead, they devolved a lot of time looking into the field of rocketry and started developing stuff like V1 and V2. So it was a lose-lose situation for us, and it was a lose-lose situation for them. But here you go, the Paris gun, one very, very bad idea. Second bad idea, we're going to turn our attention to Russia for once and talk about their circular monitors. So in the 1870s, the Russian Navy, more specifically the Black Sea Fleet, decided that they needed to protect the mouth of their rivers were monitors. And they looked towards, I believe he was German, a German engineer who had that idea of making ships with a weird hull shape, not completely round but not completely elongated either, something in between. And a Russian engineer looking at us thought, we can do something a bit better, and they came up with circular monitors. Now, a circular monitor was, in theory, a very good idea. Low draft, so it could operate as a coastal ship, but also go inland up river. So that was a good plan. The other thing was, on very calm water, a circular hull is very, very stable. Very good. That was the theory. In practice, the Black Sea is never really calm, and as soon as you have some waves, well, that ship with its shallow draft, it was just pitching and rolling very, very badly indeed, and to a point where seasoned sailors on board the ship during the trial were so violently seasick, they were actually unable to perform any task, any duties. The other issue was that even at idle speed, if it wasn't moored strongly and properly, the ship would just spin very, very slowly on its own axis. Again, not great. And then obviously when you fire the gun, well, if you were firing a gun in one direction, the ship would start spinning with the recoil in the other direction. Finally, those ships too were built actually, they were almost impossible to steer. So it's great if you want to sail forever in a straight line, but if you want to turn at some point, you will have a problem. So yes, they were used once in action, and they were actually moored to the beach and used as a fixed gun platform. So not a good idea at all. That was our second bad idea, the Russian circular monitor. Alright, third and last bad idea for a weapon. And this time we'll look toward Great Britain. So, the Blue Peacock mine. What can be said about the Blue Peacock mine? British scientists are very well known. British scientists, engineers, mechanics, they are well known for thinking outside the box. In this case, they might have strayed a little too far from the box, to be completely honest. So what they were looking at, cast your mind back to the early 50s. The West is looking toward the Soviet Union, and they feel the Soviet Union has an advantage over the West in terms of conventional forces. The Soviet Union has more tanks, it has more men. British scientists were like, how could we slow them down should they push through the Fulda Gap? And they came up with the idea of a nuclear mine buried underground. Not one, but several of them. But the idea was create a nuclear mine. When the Soviet attack, the collective West would have to try and stop them, slow them down, knowing that at some point they would have to start withdrawing. And that was the moment at which those nuclear mines would have to be buried in German land with an 8 days fuse. Western forces would withdraw in good order, hopefully, and the Soviet would start advancing, and those nuclear mines would detonate under them or in their rear. And the idea then would be not only to vaporize several thousand Soviet soldiers, but also create kind of a dirty, irradiated no man's land through which nobody could be able to cross or operate in. That was the idea. So then they started having a look at the logistics behind, and they were like, well, the batteries might not last 8 days in winter. German winter, known to be very cold. 1950s batteries, not so good with a cold, buried underground. They had a look at insulations, and it didn't work. But then one of the Brits just went, why don't we put chickens in the bomb? The bomb is actually a big sealed container with anti-tempering device. If the Soviet had known a bomb was there and tried to open it, it would have blown in their face. But it's basically a big capsule with a bomb inside of it. And they were like, if we get a handful of chickens in the bomb, you give them food and water, only has to last 8 days, right? Those chickens should produce, in theory, enough heat that it would keep the battery warm enough to be able to operate. 8 days later, pop goes the fuse, pop goes the bomb. Problem solved. They had to make some modification on the inside of the bomb. Chickens have a bad habit at pecking at everything, so they had to put chicken wire everywhere inside the bomb to stop chicken pecking at things that shouldn't be pecked. And I suppose there's a fair few things that shouldn't be pecked in a nuclear bomb. And then the bomb was ready. And then, well, they decided not to use them. One, when the Germans heard about it, they were not very impressed. The whole thing had been developed behind their back, or so they felt. So they had been told that those containers were actually generators, and they were not very enthusiastic at the idea of creating a nuclear wasteland across Germany. So the project was abandoned. That's it. We're going to throw quick and easy editing around it, and then we'll publish it. Obviously, we will refine the presentation. I'll have a share next time, promise. We'll refine the presentation, and we will also refine the content. But we just wanted to release a balloon into the atmosphere, just a little test, see how it goes. Thank you for your support on the page and in the group. Obviously, keep an eye on the website. It is a treasure trove of all the article. I'll try from time to time to create new content for it. And thank you very much for your, most of the time, polite interaction on the Defensionem, the War Bible group on Facebook. It's very, very much appreciated. We know that some of you guys have been following us now for years. So thanks to all of you. Have a good weekend, and we'll see you next time.